Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Miss Texas Show with your co-host, Melissa Santana. Excited as always to bring you another edition of the show, but also another wonderful guest. And today's guest, Dr. Suzanne, is going to be coming to us with a wealth of information and a wealth of knowledge, not only because she is a clinical assistant professor, but because she also founded a psychology center, has worked in the field of psychology for an immense amount of time. She has actually practiced psychology for over 20 years. And so has all of that experience, has founded a center for cognitive behavioral treatment. Again, already a clinical assistant professor and does many other wonderful things. So we will hear from Suzanne today, and I am looking forward to speaking with her, and I hope you all are too.
The Ms. Texas Show is a voice of hope for victims, survivors, advocates, and community leaders against gender-based violence to share their stories and resources. We began showcasing life in Texas. Today we are impacting lives not only in Texas, but also around the world. Under our segment Military Time, we run this segment in partnership with the National Veterans Chamber of Commerce. We invite military and veterans who have overcome traumatic events to share their experiences during and after their military service. Under our beauty segment, we invite fellow pageant winners and contestants, artists, musicians, actors, models, and dancers, and last but not least, our survivor leaders from family violence, sex trafficking, sexual assault, stalking, and other traumatic events who are ambassadors for these causes to share their lives and the impact they have made. To become a guest on our show, msusatexas@gmail.com. If you would like to support victims and survivors of gender-based violence, make a tax-deductible donation to Hope Picks Global at www.hopepyxglobal.org.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome to the Miss Texas Show. Excited as always for you not only having another edition of the show and you being able to tune in, but also to be able to officially welcome our wonderful guest. And so today I have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Mouton-Odum, who is the founder and director of Psychology Houston, PC, the Center for Cognitive Behavioral Treatment. Dr. Mouton-Odum is also a clinical assistant professor at Baylor College of Medicine and the president of SciTech LLC, Technology for Psychology. She has practiced psychology for over 20 years in the Houston area and has extensive, I would imagine, experience conducting cognitive behavioral treatment for children, adolescents, and adults, psychological assessments, as well as evidence-based psychological treatments. So a wealth of knowledge that we are going to be able to have today. Also, she is a member of the Scientific Advisory Board of the TLC Foundation for Body-Focused Repetitive Behaviors and is the past president of both the Texas Psychological Foundation and the Houston Psychological Association. She has published numerous scientific journal articles, presents both internationally and at national conferences, and is co-author of 5 books for the general public. And so no small feats there. I am so excited and I'm so grateful that you took the time to be with us today, Doctor. And so if you do not mind, I would love for viewers to get the chance to know you, who you are, a little bit about your journey, what brought you here today, or like what led you here today, and just a little bit more about you.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me on the show. So as you said, I'm a licensed psychologist who's been in practice in Houston for, I think it's actually more like 25, closer to 30 years. It's been a long journey. I was raised in Texas, went to college here, grad school here, kind of bounced around to different cities in terms of my education. I became particularly interested in working with people with anxiety disorders along the way. And so I see a lot of patients with panic disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, OCD, social anxiety, phobias, trauma, and it's super rewarding work because we see people get better. And that is something that's not always true in psychology. And so, the journey has been from working by myself to then building a practice, in which we now have 10 therapists who all kind of do what I do, and we treat the same sorts of anxiety disorders, in an attempt to really pool our resources and help more people. And so that's been really amazing. COVID, I think, has added a twist, especially with anxiety. We've seen an increase in the last few years of especially young people feeling anxious, depressed, and hopeless. And so that's been something we've always seen, but the numbers that we're seeing have been really elevated in the last couple of years. And I'm married. I have 2 children, both of which are grown. And anyway, and so that's me in a nutshell.
Wonderful. But nope, I definitely am gonna dive in there because I definitely would I appreciate that. It's wonderful to know that, yeah, you've definitely, grown in that way, as the expert you are in that field. And it's wonderful that you've been able to make your own practice now. But as you mentioned, I would love to know. So what drew you into psychology in the first place? What was life like for you growing up? Just more about, the person behind, all the experience and wealth that you have.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Houston, and I had a pretty normal childhood. My parents divorced when I was in high school, and that was sort of the biggest trauma that I had faced as far as my development. And I think that ultimately, watching how myself and my 3 siblings all coped with the same event in 4 very different ways was fascinating to me. And that really stuck out. And I guess you would call that individual differences and individual ways of coping with the same event. And that always struck me as so unusual. You would think in a family with the same genetic makeup and the same experience that we would all sort of cope in the same way. And that got me interested in studying behavior and really understanding how people cope and resilience and, and the psychology behind sort of coping and personality.
Absolutely. And when you saw that, if you don't mind sharing, what
Sure.
did you notice were the differences between you? How did you happen to take it yourself? How did you notice your siblings? How did you see those differences manifesting themselves and showing up for them?
Yeah. I think that one of my siblings was very much, this is not happening. This is great. Life is great. All is good. Which I thought was strange because it wasn't good, and then I had one who was sort of acting out as young people do and got involved in drugs and alcohol a little bit and kind of took that route. I focused a lot on school and just sort of dove into studying and trying to probably avoid emotion by just really focusing on school. And then one brother was just kind of happy-go-lucky and just kind of rocked along. And so, I don't know. Every child of divorce, I think, is affected a little bit differently. And it was one of those scenarios that kind of went on and on and on, probably for 6 years. So it was kind of a prolonged event. But again, it was, all of us kind of coping with it a little bit differently, including my parents. And how they coped with it.
Absolutely. And then and if you don't mind sharing too, what was it like for you? Did you feel particularly taken aback by that experience? I mean, I'm sure because it's hard. I feel like as a child or and it was a young person because you were actually you said high school. So that was a little bit, further.
I was 14. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not like you were toddler, you know what I mean? But it was also of course you were still developing yourself, you know what I mean? And trying to make sense of the world and all of those things. Did you feel like you were able to look at it more introspectively, more objectively? Was it difficult for you to make sense of it? Or how did you take it, yourself?
Well, I think that I probably did a little of all of it at different points. And, I was in high school and then in college and doing what high school and college students do. And so I don't know, it's in hindsight, I think probably if my parents had stuck me in therapy, that would have been helpful. And I just think back then people weren't doing that so much. And I also wasn't raising any red flags. I think my parents kind of wrote the book on how to do it wrong, and broke all the rules as many people do, and put the kids in the middle. And but it's also kind of a story of resilience, and sort of managing difficult times and surviving. And I think that's probably set the stage in life for me to face other difficult situations that obviously inevitably come along, and sort of manage those maybe even more successfully. I think that's sort of what happens in life, is we have to learn from the negative things that happen to us as best we can. And sometimes it doesn't seem like we can, but if we can, that really is a testament to resilience.
Absolutely. Which definitely makes sense. And that's actually what's fascinating to me, is that having not had that introduction yourself to therapy, that you're now, like, of course, one of the main advocates for it now, given the fact that you have your own practice. But I think that's actually the case for a lot of folks, unfortunately, that might not have also had that introduction. So I just love that, you're able to champion for it now, and you're able to help so many others find therapy that they may not also have had when they needed it. I mean, I think
Sure.
too, like, some of us find ourselves playing catch up. I myself am one of them. I also have pursued therapy as an adult, and I feel like I probably should have had it as a child. But I mean,
Well, and I did pursue therapy along the way. I just didn't get it when I was in high school.
right at that exact moment.
Yeah.
But what was like that for you? So, like, what was your first introduction to therapy? For you, like, did you take to it well? Like, was it something
Sure.
that helped you?
It was
Right.
well, I think when I was in graduate school, I decided that I probably shouldn't go into this field if I didn't know what it felt like to be on the other side, and entered into therapy, A, to see what it was like, and to have that experience, and B, to process some things that hadn't been processed. And and I think no matter how little or great your trauma is, it's worthy of talking about. And and therapy helps us to build a narrative of our life. And the narrative of our life is simply how we tell our story, right? And that's our truth, but our truth can change when our narrative changes. And therapy often helps to change the narrative, to soften the edges, and change the perspective on the narrative, and then helps us in the future to kind of write our future narratives and to make sense of things as they happen, because they happen, to all of us. It's inevitable. And sort of, not that we want it or we wish it on anybody else, but the tragedies of life are going to happen. And so sort of preparing ourselves, I think there's a lot we can do. And that's really what we focus on in treatment, is building skills and helping people develop ways to cope when bad things happen.
Absolutely. And what I'm curious about is, and so with that being said, and you knowing, and you mentioned graduate school, obviously you mentioned, what happened in high school and all of that. Were you someone that came to college and immediately knew you were going to go into the field of psychology? Did you, like, start off undecided, kind of like had to, like, try different things before you knew, or like had you already known, going in?
I think I wanted to go into psychology, but I knew it required a lot of graduate school. And when I went into college, I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm signing up for 7 years after college. And so I wasn't going to be a psychology major unless I was going to commit to go to graduate school. So I bounced around to different majors, but I kept going back to it. I think it was around junior year, I decided, okay, I'm going to switch my major to psychology, but then I had to commit to myself that I was going to apply to grad school. And because it's not what you're thinking about, unless you want to go to medical school, or you want to be a lawyer, and those things are obvious, that they require graduate school. I just wasn't ready to make that commitment at 17 or 18.
Absolutely. And a lot of people aren't. That's exactly why I actually ventured to ask that question, because I know that there may be others that are, like, still considering their different options, which is perfectly okay. Like you mentioned, I mean, it's perfectly okay to do that. It's also perfectly okay to get help. And so, we're mentioning a lot about therapy today. And so it's definitely something that none of us should feel, shame. Although I do think it's definitely not something accepted by society, though. I know we still have that stigma, what I mean? And it's still not something that's widely accepted. I mean, there are many that do support it and of course are advancing that conversation, but they're not without, they're not without the obstacles that they still like run into just because unfortunately in society, altogether, we still make that difficult. And so I'm glad that after all the bouncing, you figured out that you definitely did want to go, because clearly I think the major was calling you for a reason because you've definitely been in it and have contributed so much to the field, but enough to also, create your own practice and all of that. But so I'm curious about that. Like, so before you decided to, make your own practice, I'm assuming you practiced all of that. Could you walk us through like that part and like what that was like and how your career went, some career highlights maybe?
Well, so one of my areas of specialization is hair pulling and skin picking, which is body focused repetitive behaviors. And I was practicing by myself in a little corner of Houston and seeing people with BFRBs here and there. And I was invited to go on a local talk show in 2000. And the whole hour was on hair pulling. And so I had a very brave client who went with me, and there were other people on from the national organization, the TLC Foundation. And so it wasn't just me. I had my little 3 minutes of fame, and I got back to the office and I had 80 phone calls. And I realized that there was a need. And so I kind of pivoted my practice and I really started focusing on BFRBs, which are much more common than anybody ever realized. I got very involved with the national organization. I've written books on it. I'm just getting ready to publish another book, a clinical guide to treating hair pulling and skin picking for professionals. And it's just become so much of what I do. It's an obsessive compulsive and related disorder. I see a lot of people who have OCD as well. And anyway, so I, really focused on that for about the next, 18 years. And over the course of those 18 years, I started working with the University of Houston doctoral program in clinical psychology. So every year I would get a student and train them as part of their practicum experience, and train some amazing professionals. And one by one, some of them started coming back and asking, can I work with you? Can I work with you? And so it eventually came in 2017. I decided, okay, so I kind of cherry picked a few that really wanted to work with me and that were excellent clinicians. And I formed a business, and they work at the business. We all work together. And then over time, we've hired more and more people because the need is so great. And we're getting ready to hire 2 postdocs in the fall, and I have another student coming. So the nice thing about having students is we can always offer a sliding scale and a reduced rate, because that's part of the problem is insurance pays very little. It's limiting. And many people that want to come to us either don't have the right insurance or can't afford it. So it's always nice to be able to offer treatment to people that couldn't afford it.
Absolutely. But that is incredible. So 80 calls, my goodness. So like, I
You
mean,
wouldn't have thought.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
seriously. Because that's what I was thinking. I was like, wow. I mean, I definitely think that I could see a lot of people, like, that definitely doesn't sound like something I haven't heard of, but like to know that many people like either have suffer from it, you know what I mean, have some direct contact, man. So yeah, that's incredible. But so speaking of your 3-minute spiel, so I'm curious because and I actually would represent one of the people that do not know about those, body repetitive behaviors. If you don't mind educating us today on it, but just telling us a little bit more, because honestly, I can say for one, I don't know too much about it, and I'm sure there might be others that don't either.
Absolutely. And it's the best kept secret. Nobody talks about it. It's actually, they're related to, say, nail biting or nail picking. But it manifests as hair pulling, which can be scalp hair, eyebrows, eyelashes, facial hair, leg hair, arm hair, pubic hair, really any hair on the body. And then skin picking is also referred to as excoriation disorder. And it could be acne excoriation or acne picking, or it could be mosquito bite, scratching. But then it continues. It's not just, oh, I popped a pimple. But then I kept messing with it until people have scars or infections, and it can get to be quite dangerous. And so these behaviors are neurobiological, genetic, but also environmentally driven by context, meaning if someone's alone in a bathroom in front of the mirror with bright lights, that might be a context that would increase the likelihood of skin picking or hair pulling. Typically, it's done when no one else is around. And it's to achieve a goal, like to get rid of all of the wiry hairs or the coarser, thicker hairs, or ones that are out of place, or to make a scab, the skin smooth, or to fix a blemish, or to remove an ingrown hair. And so there's this kernel or nugget of I'm doing something good, but really it's doing damage, right? And so if you remove all of the hairs that aren't pleasing on the head, you're not going to have many left, because they're not all perfect. And so it ends up becoming a problem for people. It's treatable. We use cognitive behavioral therapy. We understand the context as well as internal triggers. Internal triggers could be emotions like stress or tension or anxiety. It could be thoughts like this eyebrow has to match that eyebrow, or all of those gray hairs have to go, or my skin has to be smooth, or all of the gunk has to be out of my pores, or I can't survive the day. So we evaluate sort of what are the cues and triggers for the behavior, and then we offer ways to solve that without doing damage to the body. And if people, I always say it's sort of like diet and exercise. If you do it every day and you actively engage, it's going to get better, but it does require some effort and energy every day. That's, we all know what to do to lose weight. We just don't always do it. And so it's not just knowing what to do. I know I should eat the salad and not the hamburger. I know these things, but I don't always make that choice depending on whatever's going on around me or internally inside of me. And so it's helping people to kind of make that commitment and problem solve difficult situations,
Which I love. And so, and that is fascinating. I had no idea, but I'm sure as you're describing it, I'm like, oh, I actually do know a person that, has suffered from that. I've also had my own, nervous tendencies, even if they may not have risen to that level, they still there, so we all have our ways of coping. And so I just think it's just, like I said, incredibly fascinating, that part. But that was actually going to be my next question. So speaking of treatment modalities, there are many that exist, but like you mentioned, you definitely do specifically cognitive behavioral therapy. And so I know for some that may be a completely new term as well, like they have no idea what exactly that entails, like what steps go into that. So I would love for you to also let us know more about that.
It's a great question. So I think many people, when they think of psychotherapy, they think of the more traditional, old school Freudian kind of long-term, just sort of, lay on the couch or not, but just talk about your childhood and just talk. And what we do is more looking at specific behaviors or conditions, and how can we understand the thoughts or the cognitions. And I mentioned a little bit narratives earlier, sort of how we speak to ourselves, the running commentary in our mind or the narrative of our life, as well as our behaviors, how things get reinforced, the behaviors we engage in, and help a person to change whatever, meet their goals by manipulating those things, right? So if I tell myself every day, everybody hates me, the world is against me, and I'll never be happy, it's going to be hard to be happy, right? So if that's an underlying, even if it's not a real belief, a lot of times we'll talk to people and they're like, well, I actually don't really believe that, but I say that to myself every day. And so sometimes it's just a matter of changing the narrative. And it's just a habit. I really truly believe we have brain habits and things that we just are used to doing in our mind that we can change. And it can change everything. It's changing our perspective, changing how we think about a situation. If you find out that the person who was snarky at the grocery store to you just lost their child yesterday, you're gonna think about that interaction a little bit differently, right? And so it's easy to personalize. It's easy to react as if that person was snarky to me. They must hate me. They're a bad person. And we're all guilty of doing a lot of personalization and mind reading and fortune telling about why people are behaving the way they do without really truly understanding it. And a lot of the reasons why we do that is based on this narrative that we have about life. And so I'm fascinated by all of that. And I really want to help people understand not so much why they came to be that way. I mean, I think that's interesting, but it's more how can we change it so that the future is different and the present is different.
Absolutely. And I think and it's just such a great process for all of us really to engage in, but especially when you find yourself with something like that where you're needing to definitely reprogram those thoughts or redirect those thoughts, and definitely that you might have. And I really appreciate your mentioning that, just because of the fact that, especially when it comes to negative messages, I feel like that's something that comes up a lot when we're on this show, especially because we're talking a lot about trauma and a lot about different things, and not just trauma but just also abuse that a lot of individuals have faced. And naturally, when you face abuse, you usually comes with a lot of negative messages that come behind that. And so sometimes, even when the abuse is gone, those negative voices can still be there. And so that sometimes can be one of the hardest parts, really, is just reprogramming that, really, because our brains shatter into so many pieces, and we're trying to put things back together, and we're really trying to get a new control of our lives, really, but we're having to do that first. And I just feel like, too, even when we get positive messages along the way, those negative messages are so much louder, and so it's definitely support is needed in that area. So I just love knowing that.
I 100% agree. And trauma is so, as you say, shattering. And those messages are so powerful. So I don't mean to give the message or the impression that it's easy and that you just think your way out of it. It requires a lot of hard work. And with trauma and abuse, of really separating out what's me and what is the abuser. And just because those things were said, or just because those messages were received, doesn't make them true. Just because my brain tells me something doesn't make it true. My brain tells me stuff all the time that isn't true. And so I think we're in the habit of believing our thoughts, and we need to get into the habit of getting curious about them, and sometimes ignoring them or questioning them or discarding them as irrelevant or not accurate. And it's hard. It's hard, especially if there's a thought that's been there a long time and it's screaming, or it elicits a very powerful emotional response, which trauma does. Trauma memories, anything that can remind a person of the trauma, a smell, a sound, an experience, and immediately all of that can come flooding back in. And so it's a process, but it's absolutely doable. And what I love about cognitive behavioral treatment is it's evidence-based. So it's all been tested and shown what works and what doesn't work. And so I wanted to build a practice on only using interventions that have evidence that show to work. Otherwise, what are we doing? We're experimenting with people. And that's not okay.
No, absolutely not. And I definitely, and I appreciate also what you mentioned prior to that too, is that, so what we're describing are all normal processes, so I definitely don't want anyone thinking, because I think too, so often when these things occur, it's very quick for us to think, well, then there must be something wrong with me. How is it that I always revert back to this? Like, why am I not able to get better? Like, that's why it's not bad to get support with that, because I think there is a part of a lot of us that do want to get better and out of these situations, especially if we are seeking help. If we've decided that we do want to get help, that's already great step in there, because a lot of people don't always get to that place, and so unfortunately, and they may have a lot of individuals who don't understand the value of getting that kind of support, and so unfortunately that helped them to not think that it's something worthy of pursuing. But definitely these are all normal things. So like what we just described, trauma is absolutely normal. Those negative messages are absolutely normal. Those memories, of course, are normal. I mean, we're actually, as human beings, that's naturally what we're supposed to do. You know, we have memories, we collect those. So I agree. I just think that's why it's wonderful, like you mentioned, that you're employing a treatment that is just taking advantage of those normal processes and just allowing that redirection to then occur, but in a, you know, in a positive way, in a productive way. But it's really taking advantage of what's already there and just allowing that, you know, to move. But it is, as you mentioned, something that's rooted in evidence. So if there are any individuals who are like skeptical about it, I mean, it's good to know. I mean, you do have all this evidence that supports it. There's all this research, you know, in it, but you also, like, I believe, of course, your practice is also evidence as well. I mean, you're able, you know, you've been obviously doing it for a while. It's been clearly, I'm assuming, clearly working for you all since, you know, you take advantage of it. But, you know, I do think it's something good for individuals to consider, because it is a great way. It's effective for a reason, because it does take, you know, advantage of those thoughts that we have. And so definitely something that, and then what I also appreciate about what you mentioned is that, but it is something that we all struggle with. So I also am in the world of education. You know, I work in the world of prevention. I'm like constantly talking about these topics, but I also have struggling thoughts. Like, that doesn't mean that just because we're professionals, we escape that somehow. And so like, it means that we're without those thoughts, either intrusive thoughts or negative ones at that. But it just, you know, so I just think that, you know, it definitely makes us human, makes us normal, but that's why it's okay. You know, it's not bad to be able to get, you know, and take advantage of those supports, you know, and all those.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is such a human thing, right? The questioning of ourselves, and the you know, worrying that I am not good enough, or people aren't going to love me, I'm not lovable. And even if you were raised in a perfect household, you know, kids are vulnerable to that. That's sort of like the human condition, is this questioning of, am I good enough? Am I going to be okay and survive this life? And now, I mean, it was hard enough when we were growing up, but goodness, with social media, all the comparison and all of the pictures, and everyone's doctored their pictures and everyone looks perfect and they only post perfection. And it's really hard for kids these days to know, well, you know, that's not real. That's not real. And unrealistic expectations. So then that voice gets louder. See, you're not good enough. See, look at that person. They're having this best life. Look at that. They don't know that this kid is miserable and that this kid, you know, has all kinds of issues going on, because everybody's got issues going on. But that's not how we present ourselves. I wish we could all just come to the table and say, you know, these are my insecurities. What are your insecurities? Let's all talk about our fears. Let's all talk about what makes us human. But instead, we all go around trying to pretend we're perfect, and it's not true, you know. And we see perfectionism on the rise in young people, like unbelievable, exponentially more than it was 10 years ago. Kids that cannot tolerate even the smallest, like a B is now like unacceptable. And it's really sad. And those kids are vulnerable, because failure is inevitable. We're all going to get that bad grade, or the boyfriend. I can't tell you how many boyfriends ditched me in my life. You know, that's part of life and part of growing up. But I think there's this whole generation of young people that are really vulnerable to that, because they haven't been able to experience it, and they don't have the tools to be successful in it.
Can't agree more. And I was also thinking, you know, as a person who was a perfectionist myself and wanted those great grades, I was smiling when I heard you say that, because I was reminded myself. But I also think it's interesting, because yes, I do agree that there are many, you know, unfortunately, young people that are doing that and just placing these, you know, these like expectations on themselves, definitely in these incredible standards, and some of them even impossible standards, but still placing them on themselves and like holding themselves accountable to them. But, you know, for something that for others would be considered successful. So like for them, it's like that's complete failure. But others are like, oh, I wish, you know, I could like have that or have achieved that. And so it's just incredible how, you know, which goes right back to, like you said, even in your household, for example, like you grew up with people where you, same situation, same household, but completely, you know, dealt with it completely differently. And so that happens too. Like we'll see that, you know, with young people as well, like with their siblings, but also even with their fellow classmates, like similar situations, but find themselves interpreting that completely different and just trying to make their own sense of the world. But I can't agree more about, there are a lot of extra influences. And I just feel like, so if we're going to talk about voices and how, you know, and influences, man, those are loud ones. I agree. And it's just, my other thing too is that social media provides so much like social downward comparison, but also, it just negative comparison in general. And so, and you really, and people are always filtering what it is that they post. Yet we use that as this like test or like litmus test of like what it is that, what I should be comparing myself to, like where I should be at, it's kind of almost the same marker. So it's just incredible to me that that is how we're living our lives. And so we're allowing that to have so much power over ourselves. And it's something that did not always exist. Cause I was telling my own kids that I'm like, I didn't have all, Instagram. I didn't have all that growing up, but
Thank
it just
goodness.
fascinated. I know simpler times. We didn't have that.
Well, it is. It's complicated. And I think we've also grown to be a society of black and white thinking. It's either this or that. It's perfect or it's horrible. And it's not that simple. Life is messy. And you can look at politics. People are so far apart. And, what is the solution? It's not simple. Everyone's school violence. Yes, guns 100% are a part of the problem, but it's not just that. It's a lot of stuff. And I'm all for gun control, but it's not just that. It's mental health. It's hopelessness. It's despair. It's complicated, and we have to be willing to have a complicated conversation, and we have to be willing to get messy. And I think we are become more polarized because if you don't believe this, you must believe that, and it's all just getting further and further apart. And we have to be willing to look at life as a complicated mess that it is, and that way, then we can start to solve complicated problems.
Definitely appreciate that one. In order to be able to do that, we have to have the complicated conversations. I feel like that's tweetable. Speaking of social media, right there. But it is true, and I feel like sometimes we're not even having the conversations at all, or at least the right ones. So that's like the interesting thing too. And I feel like, and I also found myself relating to you when you mentioned, I mean, you eventually had your introduction to therapy, but there was also this one point where, like you were saying about parents necessarily, they could write the book, unfortunately, on the wrong ways about handling things. I had parents like that as well. And so I just feel like, and I get it. I mean, there was also a lot of, shame that came with that, embarrassment, not wanting to have to admit that, like that I'm wrong, that there was that. But of course, I, as a child, really just wanted like just some validation that this wasn't necessarily the best thing that was going on and that we're all dealing with it. So let's deal with it together. Let's at least have a conversation about it rather than ignore it. And now in the process, I feel ignored and I feel like I'm not seen and I'm not getting the proper help I need. So I feel like I can't agree more with that, yep, we definitely have a lot of complicated things that are taking place in the world. We definitely have a lot of, there's a lot of layers to them, a lot of complexities, but in essence, because of that, we got to be willing to have those conversations and just really start somewhere. Because the other thing is, are they going to be perfect conversations? No, I just think we just need to start, and just, we at least need to have, right, at least somewhat, and just being able to help and provide those pathways and provide those platforms that may not exist right now because we're too afraid to have them. So I definitely can.
Looking for a simple answer is either this or that. And it's not going to be a simple answer.
Not at all. And so with that being said too, I know that you also teach, and so you do all these other things as well. I mean, I don't know if you like, pick and choose sometimes where you're able to like teach more classes and all of that. Cause it's a lot. I mean, even reading, I was like, wow, that's a lot that you do. I think it's wonderful. But then I'm also curious about that. So then also like, I know you also, like I said, are also a professor. And then speaking of educating, I know you educate with the books that you've written and all of that. So I'm just curious to hear, what that's been like, how you balanced it with everything, how that experience has been, just all those great things.
So the educating I do is more giving lectures and workshops than actually teaching courses. I also train students at our practice. And so supervision and clinical training is I wouldn't say a huge part of what I do, but it's definitely part of what I do and what I love. But really, rather than writing journal articles, I really like writing books for people, like real people, and that would potentially help real people. And as a result, I own a company that builds interactive self-help programs for different behavioral disorders. And so trying to help people through the internet, because there's so many people out there that need help and we can't see them all one by one. So we try to figure out, okay, writing a book can help people, or having a website that has an interactive self-help program that could help a person with a behavioral disorder So we've built several of those. And that's a fun way to also mix up what I do, but to take what I do into a platform that could help thousands of people at a time rather than just one by one by one.
Which is amazing. And I feel like it's a direction already going in. I think that was one of those, mixed blessings that we got from the pandemic. Is I've actually also found myself using technology way more than I ever did in the past, and just didn't realize all the possibilities that existed with it, though. Like, it really does provide connection. It provides all these great opportunities. We're able to have conversations that we weren't having before. So no, I totally agree. So that's just incredible. And I'm glad you clarified like what kind of teaching you're essentially doing, but also the reach that you're able to have and the impact essentially with all the programs. But before I ask my other question, I actually had two questions that it made me think of. But speaking of self-care, I'm also curious, but with all of these great things that you do and being the incredible professional that you are, how do you take care of yourself? I'm just curious, the human behind everything that you do. But
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I have tried to be better about managing my time, because one of my biggest faults is I'll see too many clients and I'll add an extra one on, and I'll come in early tomorrow, or okay, I'll book up my day that I was going to take off. And so I'm trying to be really good about giving myself some time. And my daughter's getting married at the end of this year, and so I really want to spend time with her and planning the wedding and helping with whatever she needs. And I exercise every day, which that was a pandemic, like yoga in my kitchen. Oh my gosh. I used to go to a yoga studio, and then it became an everyday thing at my house. And now I just keep doing it at my house because it's easier than driving to the yoga studio at 5 o'clock in the morning. And so exercise is a huge part of self-care for me, and social, relationships, tending to my family and my friendships. And think what else? Just got back from vacation. I love to plan vacations. So making sure that I've got a vacation, every couple of months, something, even if it's just a quick weekend, but to make sure that I'm doing things that I enjoy. I mean, if we're not enjoying life, we got to figure that out. And one way to ensure that you're going to enjoy it is to actually plan some things that you enjoy, and put them on your schedule and make them happen. And so it's easy to not do that and think, I got to work, or I got to do this, or I don't have time for that. And you really have to be good about putting those things on your schedule. And then recently my husband and I have gotten really into healthier eating. He has some medical issues. And so we've changed a lot of our diet and trying to eat really clean and healthy. And I consider that a big part of self-care as well.
Ooh, and what I'm also hearing is some intentionality behind, like making sure that you're intentional about your self-care, and it is true, because I think we're very good, like what you just mentioned about the scheduling, the things that we have to do, but then we kind of like neglect the things that we actually like to do. And so and we kind of forget how important those things are along with everything else you mentioned. So I'm very glad that you, shared, because it's definitely important, especially as someone like yourself, who's a clinician, who works with others, who's constantly pouring into others and helping others, and doing all of those things. It's absolutely important to direct that to yourself. And I think it's also wonderful to hear, with your husband. I'm not sure where you all met and how long, how long you've been married, but just too that even with marriage, like you're finding like new levels of finding new health, and now how to be healthier, happier, and just like it just sounds like there's growth there too. And I think that's also a wonderful thing that I love to hear, is that even couples that have been married and all of that they're still finding new activities, new interests, like unlocking, new things that they can do, new activities. So it's just always great to hear that. So I think that's just awesome, and then we can always like evolve and have new goals. But it's also wonderful to hear that you do that even within your own family, with your own.
Absolutely. And it is intentional. And I think even building the practice that I built is because I wanted more people around, and people that energize me, and people that are fun. So we all really like each other. We hang out. We have happy hours once a month. We eat lunch a lot, in the staff room, and laugh. So really trying to create parts of my life that are fun. And how do we make this fun? How do we make family fun? How do we make work fun? How do we try to up level things when we can?
Can't agree more. Definitely. And also, and with that being said, I'm also curious. So yes, what plans do you have for the future? How you plan to make more of an impact? Are there, are there more books in you? Like, I'm just curious, like, what does the future hold for
Yeah,
yourself?
well, thank you for asking. So I have a book that is going to publisher end of the month. So that's nice to have that project kind of coming to get some closure. I'm sure we'll have edits, but that's great. And then another big project, my piece is sort of winding down in the next 6 months. My daughter's moving to another country. So I'm hoping that I will be visiting. So I'm really trying to be intentional in the next few years about balancing work and also family. And in the past, I have not done as good a job of that. So I'm going to really try to enjoy when she's in another country, spending time over there and not putting my patients before my family.
Can't agree more with that. Absolutely. And even with the practice itself, do you feel like, do you see any growth happening, in those areas? Do you feel like it's, well, and actually that's a good thing too, is that being where you are now, do you also feel like the opposite, that it's actually in a great place and that you've actually laid that foundation? And so,
Oh, yeah.
it's going in the right, curious what it looks like also on the professional side also.
Yeah, no. And I think that's why I think it's going to be okay for me to do that, because there's plenty of people here that can take on new clients and can take care of my clients if I'm out of pocket. And I'm feeling more and more comfortable taking more time off, which is good. And I'm kind of at an age where, I'll probably retire in 10 years. And I, and what would that look like? Or at least work a whole lot less and write more and be with family more and hopefully grandkids. And so just really, again, being intentional about life and planning sort of how do we want this to go.
Oh, I love that. But also cool life on the other side. So yes, hopefully rest and relaxation in your retirement, more of that. And and I definitely think if anyone has earned it, it would certainly be you with all the great contributions you made.
You're very sweet, but we all deserve it. We all, and I'm not saying to not work, because I still see myself even in retirement, probably still seeing clients, but not at the level. And I love to write, so I will always be writing. I love projects. I've started painting during COVID. So that's been really fun. I have a creative side to me that I didn't realize. And so I've really been nurturing that. And just, I think doing nothing is a misunderstanding that will make people happy. It actually makes people miserable. But it's doing different things and doing things that maybe don't cause as much stress. But I still want to be involved in life and doing things that just may look a little different.
Oh, very cool. But yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Well, first of all, painting, that's awesome. Because I agree. We had talked so much about like practicing and all these other things. And I'm like, wow, like painting, it's so, wonderful to hear that you do have this completely different interest that's, related, can of course be related, but also unrelated. And just, that you can just foster now and just put time into that. And it's just something fun. It's something that brings you joy. So it's just, wonderful, definitely to hear that. But I have to repeat that word that you just gave in that gem, that actually we make it seem like we actually would rather do nothing, but really it's doing different things. I do agree with that, because I have absolutely had time off. I remember having maternity leave and like finally getting that rest. And I was like, cool, I'm just at home and I can just bond with the baby. And then I swear, like a week later, I'm like, oh, okay, like this was nice, but I just wish I was doing something else and just love the baby. But it's just
Yeah.
like, what am I doing for me? So I definitely agree. It's really just knowing what those different interests are. And you can always figure those out. Like, even if you don't know what all of those are right now. I mean, like you said, you discovered painting, recently, like, well, semi recently. And so like, not a bad thing whatsoever. And it's actually something now that you're a new thing that you can also put joy into and all of that. So it is wonderful to hear. But I definitely hope viewers, you also feel encouraged that it's never too late to, find a new interest, to pour into yourself, to figure out what those things are, what is worthy of your time, and what, and also what does bring you more joy, because like you mentioned, we absolutely do all deserve it. We've definitely worked for it. And we in life shouldn't just be only about that work, but just where are we finding that balance and how are we, still making sure we're living our lives instead of just, allowing it to pass us by. And so I definitely love that. And so with that, I would also say, if individuals wanted to get, more information from you, learn from you, connect with you, how can they do that?
Well, so my website is psychologyhoustonpc.com. And I believe there are emails and phone numbers on there where I could be reached. And would love to chat if anybody wants to call and chat about therapy or ideas. I'm busy, but I try to make time for people.
Absolutely. And then with that too, I mean, and speaking of being busy, that's why we appreciate so much that you took the time to be with us today. That you're also, affiliated with our show, with the, International Book Awards, with everything. And so, we're definitely happy, like I said, to have you. I'm just curious, are there any other, nuggets of wisdom, any pearls, that you want to share with everyone else? Is there anything else you would love to share with our viewers today?
Oh, well, I think one thing that many of us are lacking is self-compassion. And there's a big part of psychology that's growing body of research. And actually the founder of the self-compassion movement lives in Austin, Texas, and teaches at the University of Texas, Kristen Neff. And I trained with her, and I do a lot of that work with clients, just teaching them how to be gentle with themselves. We're pretty good to ourselves when things are going well, but the second things aren't going well is amazing how we turn on ourselves, and we're brutal. And so really teaching people how to take care of themselves when they're suffering and when things don't go right is a passion of mine. And I think especially women, we're so guilty of it. I mean, we judge ourselves, we're horrible, and it doesn't lead to happiness. I think we think that it does. It's going to make us work harder or do better. And it's debilitating. And so I would encourage your viewers to be gentle with themselves and to talk to themselves like they would talk to their best friend, not their worst enemy. Most of us say things to ourselves we would never say to our best friend.
Oh, can't agree more. And agreed. I mean, I definitely think so. Not only are the negative messages so loud that we hear, and including from, from influences, from people, from social media, but then there's that negative voice that we hold ourselves. And that one is powerful, especially because that's the one we can't escape. I mean, it's within our own selves. Like we take it with us. We base a lot of our decisions on it. And so, we do, like, I agree. I just think that we are very critical, and we're also not realizing how it can be crippling as a result. Like there's so much more that we could probably do and more potential that we could realize. But unfortunately, we lean into the doubt, or we lean into the fear.
And understanding on the last note that it can be changed. So that's all I had to say.
Oh, no, definitely. And I didn't want to stop that, because I agree. And I think that too often we do forget that. And so, we definitely, we need to give more time to that and realizing that, and just taking time to definitely recognize that, and how we don't need to do that, because it absolutely can be changed. And so with that, Doctor, it was certainly a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Having you on today. But viewers, you heard it. There are ways to be able to connect. Please, the website, but there's also the books. And I don't know, did you want to mention all of them? I forget. What are all some of the books that you have?
The book that's nominated for the award is Out of the Rabbit Hole, A Roadmap to Freedom from OCD, which is a book written by myself and Sherry Bloom, who suffered with OCD, and it's sort of her journey out of the rabbit hole. But I've written several books on sensory regulation, as well as BFRBs. So kind of in that wheelhouse.
Awesome. But then, and even with that, I mean, because I was rapping naturally, but also like, but we of course still have time. So I don't want to feel like it was rushed there. But, and so speaking of that too, like, has that also been more of just where you've been at? Do you imagine that you will also touch on other topics, or have you found that, to be your comfortable space, or do you also?
Well, this is what I know, and where is my comfortable space, but I could see it going in the direction of anxiety as well.
And we definitely could use more education in there, because I mean, there's a lot of, if there's anyone that if there's a lot of individuals that like might have experience, it definitely will be in that area. I can definitely say, we can definitely say. So it's something pervasive and definitely individual. So very exciting and good to hear, but definitely I encourage those to, connect, because also, not only as the writer that you are and also but also, and the educator, but just also as a person who has, established a private practice, who can speak to all of these different things. So I definitely encourage any and everyone who might want to, connect to learn more from you in that way. So I thank you once again.
Thank you.
Always, absolutely. And thank you, viewers, always for tuning in, being with us. And I hope you learned some things today, because I definitely did. So thank you.
Thank you.